So I just watched the debate between Jared Taylor and Richard Hanania over diversity. I thought I'd make a quick video to give some of my general thoughts on it. For the most part, Hanania didn't have that many substantial rebuttals to Jared Taylor and was very much on the defensive, other than pointing out that some of the most economically productive places in the United States are also the most diverse, like Florida or California. Of course, we could just as easily say that the reason they are diverse is because they are productive and people are simply seeking economic opportunities there, not that they're productive just because they're diverse. But overall, I think Jared was able to produce a much more coherent and desirable worldview in this discussion than Hanania did. He already started out strong by reminding Hannania that no one in the actual population cares about abstract measures of growth like GDP. He pushed back on the tech bro obsession with Homo economicus and explained that what people actually want are strong organic bonds and a high level of trust and solidarity in society. Hanania's only response was to point out that Western culture is now dominant around the world and that he says it's a sort of deracinated people like Turks who are all walking around with iPhones and Western clothing. But of course, one could rebut by saying that no Turk would ever say that Turkey should become a home for white Americans. And every Turk should agree that being Turkish is unique and special and worth preserving. So while it may be true that capitalism has a globalizing effect, I think that the only places where capitalism has had an outright deracinating effect are in countries that are economically driven by world competition, such as the United States and places like Europe or the UK. The competition drives some of this deracination is an important observation because the fundamental reason why companies want these high-skilled immigrants is to undercut the labor costs of training and hiring native-born white workers. This helps give them a competitive edge and earn the majority of the market share with minimal overhead. Now, I want to switch gears and talk about another aspect of this so-called elite human capital problem. As you probably already know, Elon Musk was on Twitter calling white Americans retards and calling immigration restrictionists subtards, whatever that means. His position is basically that high-skilled genius immigrants from places like India are superior to American labor because there's some kind of skill shortage here. The punchline for this attitude is basically, we need more immigration from India so we can outcompete China economically and technologically. And there are some obvious problems with this argument. The first problem, which is something that Sam Hyde has pointed out, is that China sees no need to hire foreign human capital. They're not competing with us to get high-skill engineers from India, so if it's such a great competitive advantage, why don't they avail themselves of it? There are also obvious reasons why they aren't doubling over themselves to get foreign human capital. The first reason is that China is a deeply patriotic country, patriotic to the point of almost having racial loyalty. They're completely dedicated to the idea of Chinese collectivism, so much so that when non-Chinese groups interfere with the Chinese nation, such as the Uyghurs, they've started putting them in camps. China does not see diversity as a strength whatsoever, and the reason why is not only because it lowers social trust and introduces split loyalties, but also because, and this brings me to my second criticism, the economic benefits of diversity are always temporary, and after a single generation, it runs its course and turns into a liability. You might think that importing geniuses of various races to the United States is sound economic policy, but there's a phenomenon called regression to the mean, in which genius parents tend to have non-genius children. It's very likely that the benefits of bringing these top 0.1% geniuses in from India ends with the original person who immigrated here. Then we will have a population of immigrants who, now incapable of competing to the same standard as their parents, will see their decline in income and standard of living as a kind of oppression, and they will then join in on the various diverse groups attacking white people socially and economically if they don't already. They will have an incentive not to join the system, but rather to tear it down. That's why I say it will become a liability. Not only will the comparative advantage disappear along with the geniuses, but also any benefits from bringing in this human capital at all will disappear, not to mention the fact that H-1B visa recipients tend to be underpaid and they will see this as a kind of oppression as well. What we're looking at when we see these billionaire tech bros calling for the immigration of genius talent from around the world is what Marx pointed out in Capital, that under capitalism, there's an incentive to consume rather than to preserve labor. If they cared about preserving labor, then they would try to maintain and invest into, by training, the white stock of intelligent laborers who have been the backbone of this country since its founding. That way, They could solve this supposed shortage by bringing up the national talent that already exists. Instead, they wish to consume pre-educated world labor by brain draining places like India or Nigeria. And this then brings us to the third problem, which is that there is only a finite number of geniuses who can immigrate, and after they're gone, then the open borders policy that is justified by elite foreign capital becomes a liability rather than a benefit. India already produces fewer geniuses per capita than the United States or the UK. 90% of all human achievement has been produced in the US, the UK, France, and Germany. Tech pros have not proved whatsoever that it is necessary for our native countries to import foreign talent in order to stay at the top. In fact, in the long run, we will have to rely on our own populations anyway, as other populations are less capable of producing geniuses than ours. This whole skepticism of nativism is justified by the cheap availability of elite foreign capital right now, but in the long term, that'll go away. And what we'll be left with is only a mass of low IQ third worlders rushing to get into the US, which will strain our welfare systems to the breaking point. Capitalist competition is the driving reason behind this short-term thinking of people like Elon Musk or Richard Hanania. Companies need to undercut each other right now to benefit themselves. This comes at the expense of the future, which is always neglected under capitalism. Really, these Faustian economic ideologies always suffer from the same problem. They don't consider what will happen when scarce resources run out. Marxists dodge the question by denying scarcity. Capitalists dodge the question by not thinking about it. Capitalists prove repeatedly that they are poor long-term planners, such as when they, for example, take out exorbitant loans expecting a return on investment before eventually defaulting. We might also think of the even little micro examples of short-term profit predominating, like crypto pump-and-dump schemes or yearly release cycles for games like Call of Duty. If tech bros cared about the future of their nation, they would be investing in domestic elite human capital rather than undercutting native workers while refusing to train them so they can even be capable of being elite human capital in the first place. As Elon Musk tweeted, if you have to have a school, then you've already lost. That's his attitude. He doesn't want to train workers because it would cause him to lose to his competition, who are already undercutting native-born workers with pre-educated foreign ones. It's a cannibalistic arms race that hurts the United States on behalf of the interests of capital, not to mention also hurting the world from whom he brain drains all of these elite foreign capital workers from. And really what the debate between Hannania and Jared Taylor comes down to is how they respectively view humanity. For someone like Hannania, humanity is just a tool for the increase of the technological monism. For Jared Taylor, humanity is an end in and of itself. I've already gone over before how disrespect for the human form is related to the Faustian attitudes of the global elite as well as anti-nationalism, so I won't belabor the point. The ultimate reality is that someone like Hanania cares more about artificial and abstract constructs like the GDP than he does about actual concrete human beings, and he just thinks that right now, diversity helps him pump those numbers up. So for someone like that, I can only say, do you also reduce your family to numbers and statistics? Do you reduce your friends to a cost-benefit analysis? If you don't, then shut up about humanity and elite human capital. Otherwise, I might be tempted to suggest that your family undergoes immigration from India. A final point I want to make is that there's a very unfortunate part of the debate where Jared Taylor badmouths West Virginian whites for not being elite human capital or otherwise being quote-unquote unfortunate. What's the worst thing that West Virginians do? They're fat, have tattoos, and smoke cigarettes. In the first place, I have to object to this clear example of anti-smoking propaganda. Smoking is based. And second, this is nothing but a clear example of classism from Jared Taylor, who, despite pushing back on the liberal reduction of humans to economic units or atomized individuals, still hasn't shaken off a certain liberal bourgeois attitude that puts class in front of race, or else ties race to class. It should go without saying that a true racial advocacy movement cannot allow class to get in the way of racial solidarity. It has no business setting up barriers between people of the same race, since the whole point is collective bargaining for our own very existence. Jared even makes the same point, so it's puzzling why he felt the need to malign West Virginians other than to attempt to ingratiate himself with Richard Hanania. Although he has since apologized for making these comments, so I can't hold it against him too hard. In the end, the debate comes down to people who value humans as part of natural biodiversity, like Jared Taylor, and people who think they can socially engineer humans to create their kind of utopia, like Richard Hanania. Hanania will, of course, deny that he's a utopian or that he wants to engage in social engineering. But how can you possibly get people of disparate ancestry to get along without some form of social engineering? How do you get people to stop seeing themselves as a race without using power to break down their identity? And what is the liberal idea of progress, but not a utopian meta-narrative? The idea that unrestrained human development will somehow lead to a shining future rather than a hideous singularity? I think we should all be on Jared Taylor's side, which is the side of nature and the organic society, a society of natural bonds between human beings sharing a common destiny. Hanania, on the other hand, as Jared Taylor pointed out, simply presents to us a future of being cogs in a machine.